Welcome to Indian Writers Forum. We have with us Vijay Prashad, historian, professor and journalist. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Recently in a talk you had mentioned that the Neoliberal agenda, the project, is not only an economic project, it's also a cultural project. So could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, look, you have a crisis that's global, and it's a crisis of jobs and employment. The International Labour Organization has suggested that with every passing year, tens of millions of people, young people with college degrees included, are not going to get jobs. And if they get jobs, the ILO has suggested it won't be what they call decent work. By decent work, they don't mean interesting work. They mean work with good standards, etc., decent hours, decent health benefits, decent pension benefits. So the jobs have degraded. And you've entered now a phrase where more and more people, perhaps the majority of waged workers, will be part of the so-called precariat, the kind of precarious proletariat. The proletariat which has precarity or insecurity as their basic mode of existence. So in this situation, how do you as a democratic government come to people and say, look, you're going to make it, don't worry, we're going to figure things out. Because governments don't have the ability to say that, and because governments have the religion of the market, where they turn and say, the market is going to find you employment, and because this market is not seeming, it doesn't seem to be able to deliver, there's a new cultural project that's been in the works for perhaps the last 25 years. And this cultural project is interesting. The project suggests that you have it within you to make it, you as an individual. And you as an individual need to take coaching classes, you need to go to a special academy for entrepreneurs, and you need to somehow imbibe the spirit of entrepreneurialism. Keynes wrote about the animal spirits of capitalism. Somehow there's this idea to generate in individuals this animal spirit of entrepreneurialism. And this is going to be created as the new subject of the modern period. We're not citizens, we're not even consumers. We're meant to be entrepreneurs. And I see this as the central cultural project of neoliberalism. If it's not able to produce, say, a jobs project, of employment, if it's not able to solve these questions, it puts the onus, the burden of solving this issue on the individual and produces this kind of cultural place where you are supposed to go take English language classes, go to a coaching institute, do 100 of these kind of self-help / corporate development, things, go for seminars, and you must better yourself to make it. And if you don't make it, it's your fault. This is very much a cultural part of neoliberalism. It's not in the so-called economic domain alone.
We'll come back to the cultural project of it. So you mentioned about the unemployed youth, and could you tell how they are forming resistances? Are they forming in different parts of the world with some examples, and of course India also, how these unemployed youth are resisting against the structure?
So interesting that the World Bank looked at North Africa. Actually, they looked at this globally. I just looked at the North Africa information, but they looked at it globally. One of the things they found which surprised me is, yes, there is a general unemployment problem. Some of this, of course, has to do with mechanization, increased productivity, various factors that have led into this. But what they found was that if you break up the people looking for jobs into three sectors, that is to say those with virtually no education, those with very high education, PhDs, whatever, top engineering degrees, that kind of thing. And then the middle section, which was a college graduate. The highest per capita rate of unemployment was for the college graduate. So those who went and got very, advanced degrees, they could find employment, say, in some technology company or something or the other. They generally found themselves being absorbed. Those who had very minimal education could also find employment. Now, doesn't mean that it's remunerative employment, doesn't mean it's decent work, but they could find some employment. It's those who had a college degree who were not then prepared to go out there and work in a tea shop and were not prepared literally to go out there and get some high-tech job because they had a college degree. The rate of unemployment there per capita was the highest. And when I looked at the North Africa information, what was interesting is during the time of the unrest in North Africa, in Egypt, in Tunisia, etc., they said there's a demographic bulge. In other words, it's a youth bulge. Actually, the explanation for the rising in North Africa wasn't by age. That is to say, it was not just because there's a demographic youth bulge, it was by education. So very large numbers of people in these urban areas that came into the squares were people who had college degrees. You know, that's why they understood how to use social media, whatever. Again, it wasn't, the explanatory factor wasn't Facebook or Twitter or even just merely youth. It was college educated. So in other parts of North Africa, in Morocco, in Algeria, etc., there are trade unions of unemployed college graduates because they see themselves having a discrete kind of politics. You know, they went and they did their degrees, they followed all the so-called rules. They studied hard for the exams, they got into college, and they got their BA degree, they got their BS degree, whatever they got, couldn't get a job. And they are with a great sense of frustration. It's this section that either becomes, you know, goes to the squares and demands the overthrow of the government, or becomes in other countries the foot soldiers of the right wing. You know, this is the kind of section that feels betrayed by the hierarchies and is not prepared for a socialist project because there is no preparation in many of these places. You know, there is no socialist organizations in colleges and so on. So they are easy fodder for the right. And you know, when one says the right wing's mass base is say petty bourgeois, lower middle class, whatever, that's all very well and you know fancy terminology. The point is that it's often these unemployed college graduates who have certain skills. You know, they're able to read, write, etc., communicate with each other, use the internet effectively, and they are frustrated. And so the politics can swing in some countries to the left and some countries to the right.
This reminds me of how in Nazi Germany, 20% of the population was unemployed, and you know really was fodder for the Hitler. So when we talk about in that terms, when we talk about India, is it this competitiveness that's creating so much hate politics when it comes to say reservation, when it comes to attacking minorities? Is it this competitiveness that is making it easy for the right wing to divide the people?
Well, you know, let's go back now, I think more than 20 years to the Mandal Commission period, not when Mandal Commission was put in 1980, but 1990, 91, late 80s, when the agitation developed. You know, the agitation didn't develop inside a shop, it developed in the just outside college campuses, because it was about colleges and reservations in colleges and the outrage that certain people from privileged backgrounds had. You know, how dare our ambitions are going to be curtailed by reservations, etc. So educational institutions have been a real hotspot for the politics tilting rightward. As you know, opportunities have declined, and in a sense, as the left has been unable to articulate to this section of people, not the people who are saying my privileges are being taken away, I'm angry, but people who are saying that I've done everything.
Also.
But to them also.
Yeah.
What do we have to offer by way of a vision? You know, a cultural vision. I'm not talking about, you know, the politics of resentment, meaning why you don't have a job, join us. You don't have that's a politics of resentment in a way. The left has to be much more than a politics of resentment. It has to be the politics of great aspiration for a better society. Not a great aspiration for individuals, but for a much better society, better organization of social wealth, etc. So in that sense, this long-term period in India, there's been a cultivated set of resentments, humiliations, angers that have emerged out of generally young people. I mean, this is a very young country. There is a youth bulge, but it's not all young people that are feeling resentful and angry. There are people who come from specific castes who feel that their kind of ancestral opportunities have been taken away from them. There are sections of people who feel they've been pushed through this neoliberal culture to go to coaching classes or take medical degrees or whatever, and there's nothing at the other end. You know, it's one thing to believe that a state helps organize education and then say that the market will provide employment? What if there's a mismatch between the generation of education and the opportunities produced by the market? If there's a mismatch, you're going to have a serious political crisis. And I don't think the Indian state and I don't think the Indian elites have thought this through. And this is not an Indian problem, this is a global problem, because in other countries as well, they say we build opportunities through education. And then you just jump off a cliff. Okay, because the market will deliver jobs. The state is not going to come in and deliver jobs. So this is wishful thinking. And it's also very dangerous for the elites. What I'm saying is they've created a dangerous dynamic by saying let's increase education institutions, and these are often profit making. So somebody's making a lot of money churning out young people with degrees, and at the other end they're saying, well, the market will make a job for you. But it's not. And it's never going to. Because productivity and machines are displacing labor. So you're going to have a lot of people with this basic BA, BSc or some coaching diploma degree standing at the other end saying, what's going on? And they are going to either go right or left. And in the way in which politics has swung globally, they are going rightward. And that's very dangerous.
Can you give us a similar picture of US at present and with respect to the Indians in US?
America is not as young a country as India. In other words, it's fairly balanced age distribution. It doesn't have a huge youth population. It's also a much smaller population than India. It's about one-fifth of the Indian population. But in the United States, the locus of resentment is not so much at the college level, and I'll come back to that in a minute. It's at the level of people who in the 1980s, 90s and early 2000s moved in a very large body into white-collar occupations that basically are white-collar service sector, business processing, that kind of occupation. And these are people who in a previous generation, their parents' generation, may have had factory jobs. So their parents' factory jobs closed down. They would have gone to some college. They might have received some moderate forms of education, and then they went into back office kind of work. Now, by the 1990s, we saw back office work start to leave the United States. See, if factory jobs left in the 60s and 70s, back office jobs leave in the 90s and 2000s. They first go to Ireland, then come to India. And this sector, this white collar sector, when it gets pushed out, these are the men and women in their 50s and 60s, who are getting unemployed. And they are the group that creates the Tea Party when Obama gets elected after the financial crisis. And they are the base of Trump. But again, these are not white working class. These are the white collar workers in business processing, that kind of sector. And they are vicious about what's happened to their lives, as in a sense they should be. Now, what's interesting about where the Indians come in this is that Indians have to some extent mucked about with these people's lives. But it's not the fault of Indians, it's how capitalism has operated geographically. It turns out, of course, that if you had an office in Ohio, a very large place in a suburban area, you had 50 employees, and you were doing the kind of paperwork for a hospital, let's say. Okay, all hospital billing records were going through you. And you had people making pretty decent salaries, coming, sitting at a terminal. You basically had some database training, and you were managing the paperwork because the hospital didn't want to keep that on site. Now, once you develop the technology to have quite a secure server that runs wires or through satellite to somewhere in Bangalore, you're going to take advantage of the fact the wages are less. So there was a hemorrhaging of those kind of jobs to India. Now, by the way, India is losing it to China, and to other places, not just China. And India always thought it's inviolable because you have English and you have 24 hours, because you can run, when they're sleeping, you can also be working. You can have a night shift here and a day shift. So India thought it was inviolable, but actually it had nothing to do with English and all that. It had to do with wages. If Malaysia is going to be cheaper, you move there or somewhere else. You'll always find a somewhere. Wage rates will always work against people. Yeah, it will always work against people. They may return to India when Indian wage rates collapse more, but it's always. So that is one resentment that starts to develop in the central part of America against Indians. Secondly, these companies are smart. So Tata Consultancy and other firms figure out, look, you can either bring the jobs here, or listen, that's a pain because then you have to set up, servers, secure lines, and you don't know, you have to train people. It's a big drag. Why not hire 20 people instead of 50? Get them from the top Indian tech places, get some from IIT, IIM, whatever. You hire 20 people, put them in black backpacks, white shoes, black trousers and a bush shirt, send them off as TCS employees. 6 months they live basically in a little hotel, motel on the outskirts of town, and they bus into the hospital or to some off-site location, and they work there. Now they get paid lower wages than if they had been people hired in America. But for them, of course, it's huge wage. They come back with this chunk of money, and then they start their own startup or whatever in Madurai, in Chennai, wherever. But so there are two ways in which these workers were being displaced. One was the job was coming here, the other people were coming in. The people coming in generated an enormous resentment. So in this last election campaign, there were these groups that emerged quite spontaneously, which were like anti-Indians. So there was one group in Ohio, they took cameras and went to parks and were following around Indians, saying, look, they drive a Mercedes-Benz. Now, actually, the people they followed most likely were not TCS fellows, because, I know what they look like. They have a uniform, as I said, black backpack, whatever. They're not spending any money in America. They're certainly not buying a Mercedes-Benz. What they found in a park, perhaps these were some people who own a motel or something, they bought a car, they followed them, intimidating them. So Indians have become one of the foci of this feeling that somebody is taking my jobs away. It's a dangerous problem, but the Indian media has reported this zero. Part of this feeling that India and America have a close relationship has meant that anything that's detrimental to this relationship barely gets reported.
So the way the Americans see Indians, is it the same reason why even Mexicans and Muslims, everyone are looked at with such hatred?
I mean, to be fair, one shouldn't say Americans do this or Americans do that. I mean, it's certain sections that have seized on this. I would say that this section that was very much in with Trump seized on three, social sectors that they blamed for their, the kind of impossibility of their living standards. They blamed Mexican immigrants, they blamed Muslims in general, and they blamed H-1B Indians, if you can put it narrowly. And this was the target of their anger, meaning, look, Trump didn't go out at the stump and say, you're losing your jobs because of capitalism, because of productivity gains, because of outsourcing, that is bringing the massive profits that increases growth in America. So in other words, growth rates are going up, but your jobs are going, what we call jobless growth. So he didn't say that. He said, your jobs are going, I feel bad for you, and they're going because of Mexicans, Muslims, and H-1B. And so then people are going to attack those three.
Coming back to the question of culture, it's said that in the dark times you get the best of literature and best of cultural production and art. So is it really happening?
Who said that?
So yeah, you can disagree, but is it happening? Is it not happening? Is it the dark times? Is it not dark times?
I mean, listen, we've been in dark times for a very long time. One of the things about human beings is they always say, oh my God, it's horrible now. As if it was great before. And who was it great for before? Take Indian society, last 100 years. I mean, was it great for, say, a Dalit agriculturalist 50 years? It was the dark times, has been for a long while. So we tend to get worked up about these things. Now, certainly this is a pretty bleak and terrible moment. There's been an eclipse of reason globally. Attacks on education inside India, attacks on thinking, attacks on freedom of expression, all that is happening. Not necessarily produces good literature. I mean, it can produce, it's a chilling effect. People wouldn't do it if it didn't work. Intimidation works. People are silenced in some way or the other. What typically happens is in a moment of this kind of authoritarianism, you get great satire, incredible writing of disguise. The problem is that who's going to publish it today? there may be hundreds of books written. There may be a million Indian Kafkas sitting in their homes who've written the most amazing satirical writing. Who's going to publish it? Most commercial publishers have no spine. I mean, look at the way in which publishers dealt with the attacks against them from the Hindutva right. Whether it's about Wendy Doniger's book or whoever's books, they pulp these books. They say sorry, they take them and they pulp them. So they don't have the guts to even publish mainstream academic books. I mean, what was so objectionable about Wendy Doniger's books on the history of the Hindus? What was so objectionable that the press didn't fight at all? You know, they never even stood their ground for a minute. They immediately conceded and pulped it. If you're going to be so spineless, so driven by fear and the desire to make money, who's going to take the risks? So it's actually unfair to ask, will the best literature be written? Actual question is, will the best literature be published? And my answer is no. I don't think so. I think that the small independent presses may publish it. You know, we may publish 20, 30 titles a year, but people won't discover our books. You know, for us the problem isn't publishing, it's discovery. You know, for them, that is the commercial gutless houses, the problem is publishing. They won't publish the books. It's easy to discover their books. You know, I mean, come on, you walk into any so-called bookstore. Actually, these are not bookstores anymore. They are basically advertisements for big houses. You know, they don't carry all kinds of books. Most of these places are shops. You know, they sell commodities, cards, toys, this, that, and as it happens, they'll have Chetan Bhagat, which I don't even know if it's a book. Chetan Bhagat doesn't write books, he writes commodities. So in that sense, this is what you see available, but they don't have the guts to publish satire that gets under the skin of authoritarianism. I don't think it's going to happen.
Thank you, Vijay, for I hope we'll meet again for another topic.